paranormal stories in their jobs, home or others, Latam.
Once at work, I was alone at a table, for about 12 people, sitting at the far end, watching television. Suddenly, the chair next to me moved, ending up diagonally, as if someone was about to sit down and watch TV. I got really scared, stood up as if nothing happened, and ran away. My wife works as a nurse. She once told me that she was restocking supplies in a delivery room when she saw a woman inside. She didn't pay much attention and went out to the hallway to ask her colleague why the woman was there. Her colleague replied that there was no one and shouldn't be anyone there, so they both went back inside together, and indeed, there was no one there. I work in a building from 1886. It's filled with ghosts, although I must clarify that I'm an atheist, don't believe in alchemy, and detest astrology. However, I admit that there are ghosts. I'm the one who closes up at night, and I always run out. Radios turn on by themselves, footsteps, sometimes loud, can be heard, the cutlery moves. There have been times when I've heard my name being called when I'm alone, and others have had similar experiences, so I can rule out schizophrenia. At my previous job, there was an incident where 3 colleagues were closing the office, and they heard a woman scream from the basement. All 3 ran out terrified. The only reasonable explanation was that the technician had connected to one of the computers in the basement via TeamViewer and played that audio to prank them. I'll share 3 stories from my previous job. It was a factory with many years of history, well known and quite large. It is even said that the underground corridors, which I never dared to approach alone, were used during the dictatorship to move people between strategic points. Additionally, many people have died there, nothing out of the ordinary. First case, not mine, unverifiable, but it was known throughout the factory. Even my boss at the time discussed it with us. A worker felt unwell and went to the infirmary to have their blood pressure checked, but it was normal. They returned to work, but after a while, they went back to the infirmary. They never arrived. On their way, approximately 1:50 am between their station and the infirmary, they collapsed and died. Sometime later, I don't remember how long, another worker arrived at the infirmary, looking pale and saying they felt unwell. The nurse checked their blood pressure, went to get the necessary equipment, but when she returned, the worker was no longer there. She went outside to look for them but couldn't find them. Frightened because she hadn't seen them properly, she went to HR to explain the situation, providing a description of the worker. They showed her the pictures from the employee files. She pointed at one of them, saying that was the worker, despite being told it was impossible. She asked why, and the HR representative, now as pale as a sheet, told her that the person had died a long time ago in the factory. They say the nurse didn't finish her shift, she left and never came back. It seems the nurses didn't last long there. Second case, my boss personally told me this one, on September 7th, maybe I'm mistaken with the date, but it was Metalworkers' Day. There were no workers, only administrative staff. My boss, who was a technologist at the time, was walking through the silent warehouses. He couldn't remember why, but he heard someone whistle behind him. He froze, lowered his head, and kept walking without looking around, even though he heard the whistle again. He said he never wanted to walk around knowing that nobody was there ever again, haha. Third case, and this one I experienced, and it scared the hell out of me. I was in a warehouse inside another warehouse. There were 2 assembly lines, 1 operator for each line, my shift partner, and me. The gates were closed, and the doors made a lot of noise. I had heard countless stories by then. I don't remember the exact time, we rotated shifts. We were chatting and having mate while the lines were running, and suddenly we heard a loud thump inside, as if someone had lifted one of those empty plastic garbage bins and hit it against the floor. We both looked at each other, stayed quiet for 2 seconds, and trembling, I said, "If it's some jerk, I'll punch them." I stood up and walked through the entire warehouse, which was about 80 m x 30 m or maybe even bigger. I searched behind boxes, machines, and even the bathroom. There was no one. No one had entered or exited. I'm writing this with chills. I work in private security, and I was assigned to a university hospital for almost a year. I never had a supernatural experience, despite having to patrol the entire place, including the wards, basement, and consulting rooms. Occasionally, when walking through an empty ward at 4 in the morning, the speakers in the waiting room would suddenly activate and call out a patient's name. It would give you a good scare, but it became normal. During the COVID vaccine theft frenzy, I was assigned to the building where the vaccines were stored. One of the refrigerators with the vaccines was located in the basement, next to the morgue. I felt uneasy when going down there, so during my patrols, I would enter the morgue and walk around for a few minutes, carefully observing the place, hoping to get used to it. One day, after finishing my shift and taking advantage of everyone having left, I stayed and chatted for a while with my replacement and the cleaning staff. At some point in the conversation, the cleaner pointed at the morgue's camera on the monitor and said, "Look, they left the refrigerator doors open. Would you dare to go and close them?" I responded with a yes, even though it made me uneasy. I had been there dozens of times, and it was nothing out of the ordinary. I went downstairs, entered the morgue, closed the refrigerator doors, and to not appear cowardly, I checked that everything was in order. As I was leaving, I closed the door and checked that the morgue storage room was locked. I grabbed the doorknob and turned it, but the door didn't open because it was locked. Before I could let go of the doorknob, 3 consecutive knocks were heard from the other side, making the door vibrate. My immediate reaction was to run up the stairs, shouting, "Hey, my colleague's name, you jerk!" Thinking that somehow he had knocked on the storage room door to play a prank on me, which was practically impossible. When I reached the reception area, he and the cleaning staff were still sitting at the desk, completely unaware of what had happened. I told them about it, we laughed a bit, and that was it. We didn't want to dwell on the subject with my colleague, who had to stay there until 6 in the morning. However, 2 nights later, the same thing happened to him on the 2nd floor. Since that day, every time I went down to the basement, I would glance sideways at the morgue door. Once I was working with 2 colleagues, a girl and a guy, the supervisor, at an assembly table. We were the only 3 people in a small warehouse since it was a mini factory, and we were the only ones working. The supervisor's name was Roberto, and at that time, his mother was very ill and alone at home. We were completely focused on our work, not talking or playing the radio, when we heard a woman's voice clearly say, "Roberto," but we heard it right next to us, as if there was someone with us. I was frozen, looked at my coworker who was also looking at me, and asked her if she had heard it too. She said yes. Roberto was also frozen. We told him to drop everything and go urgently to his mother's house. He left, and an hour later, he came back, but everything was fine, nothing had happened. It was really strange. Began to believe in ghosts when a wheelchair moved in front of me at a hospital. I went to visit my mother who was hospitalized for pain, and suddenly, an elderly woman was rushed in on a stretcher right next to her. The grandmother was in critical condition. I'm not sure what she was suffering from, and I didn't want to ask. After a couple of minutes, the wheelchair moved as if someone had pushed it to make way. And then, within those 2 minutes, the grandmother passed away. It was something that made me believe a lot. My mother and I were frozen because the movement of the wheelchair seemed as if someone had moved it in a circular motion to pass through the narrow path near the grandmother's stretcher, which was surrounded by nurses in a very small space.